What's up and welcome back to Nowstalgia Pod 2018 year in review. Although we are going to be talking about some of the pop culture that's been going on recently, I am Pat Sheen with my co-host Dave Martinson. Dave, we're talking trends today. We're talking superlatives, winners and losers, but we're also talking Roma.
Yeah, we are.
And we're going to be talking best of movies next week. We talked best of music this past week, and the week before that was best TV. So if you're trying to figure out how should I be spending this week between Christmas and New Year's, check out those podcasts and see what you should be catching up on. And one thing you should definitely be doing before you do any of that is clicking subscribe on our YouTube, rating us 5 stars on iTunes, leaving a comment on our SoundCloud, and going there to follow us and listen to us anyway you ingest your podcast into your ear brains. Why don't we start with something else people should be watching? Roma by Alfonso Cuarón. I need to take more Spanish to be able to say that.
Cuarón. It's not that hard, dog. Come on.
It's hard to me. But I mean, everybody knows him. Anyone that's tuned into movies, I would say, knows him. He made Gravity. He also directed Children of Men, Harry Potter, Prisoner of Azkaban, as well as some other films that are not as well known. But this is a film that is going to be garnering a lot of attention as an Oscar contender for the Best Picture. And it's already won the Venice Film Festival and many other festivals. It's either won or been runner-up or third place for the major awards. The interesting thing about this film is I watched this on Netflix. It was released on Netflix on December 14th. I'm going to start with this question. We'll kind of go from there. Is this a film that you think should win Best Picture?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of been the talk for most of the time now, is that it's either the Best Picture front runner or at least in like the top 3. I would say it's between Roma, A Star is Born, and probably The Favorite, I would say, are the 3 with any real chance to win. I don't think Green Book could sneak in there, and that's the only one I think had a realistic chance recently. So it's those big 3. And, you know, I'm thinking about it because I think what Roma winning means versus what A Star is Born winning means are 2 very different things. And I'm still not quite sold on where I stand with that. But in terms of pure movie making, pure film criticism, I think Roma's a better film for sure. So I guess if that's all we're basing off of, then yeah, I think it should win. But the interesting thing to me is just the delivery method, right? You watched it on Netflix. I also watched it on Netflix. I was not planning to. I wanted to see it in the theater. I was lucky enough to have it playing by me recently. And that's kind of the clout that Cuarón brings to this movie, is even though it's a Netflix film, he's able to get it in like 200 theaters in the US and like 600 overseas, and, you know, giving people the opportunity to see it the way he intended, if they so choose. And I think the thing that sat with me is I definitely didn't have like the best sound watching it at home. I think that's, I mean, and it was probably one of the first times I'm like, man, I wish I had a bigger TV. I wish I had a better TV. I usually don't feel that way about television, but and I watch so many movies in the theater, that's usually not an issue, right? But in the case of Roma, I was like, damn, I feel like I'm neglecting the experience. I mean, I still turn off my phone. I still watch it all the way through. It's a long movie, but I still felt like I was not quite getting the best experience, you know?
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I watched it. I put my phone down, put it on airplane mode. But, the knock, I think that there's been several critiques of this film that I think are fair. But the one that I think is probably the most widely made is that it's a little slow at parts. And for having some really amazing bigger scenes, set designs and just beautifully shot moments, there's a lot of monotony and a lot of just feeling like, okay, I'm actually watching this made Cleo and everyday life and kind of what she goes through. I mean, even the opening credit scene, it's kind of slow and it sets the pace of the movie, which is great. But I found myself going back to my phone, and I actually found myself being like, I wish I did see this in the theater because I wouldn't be checking my phone. It'd be in my pocket right now. Like I would just feel like I don't want to be looking at it, and I would have that social expectation of not to be checking my phone. You mentioned that you feel like this is a better movie than A Star Is Born, or at least a better concept. Would you say? I don't know if, because I guess it's all subjective. But what do you think makes this above A Star Is Born for you?
Yeah. I think Roma is just like a superior piece of filmmaking. I think it's incredibly masterful throughout, and it's so in your face. It's like hard to deny. I mean, Cuarón actually shot the movie himself. Like he did the cinematography, he was behind the camera. He even did some of the sound mix because of the way schedules worked out. Like he used to work with Emmanuel Lubezki a lot, but he couldn't get him to schedules to match up for Roma, so he did it himself for something he had never done before. And obviously, it's very uncommon in general. And despite the fact that he was newer to those other aspects of filmmaking, it still came out so great. And I think, I mean, one thing like the black and white monochrome color palette of the film obviously is very striking, stands out right away. But you get used to it, and I think it actually kind of fit the story. But the cinematography, speaking of like just the way his camera moved, whether it would like pan across the street as they were walking on the sidewalk, or be like maybe longer shots where there's like the paramilitary's training with the staffs, right? Or even more like establishing shots of Mexico City. I think the camera's fantastic, and like you mentioned, the movie's very deliberate, very committed to the story it's telling, and that takes a lot of attention in terms of not just rushing the story. And I think the plots kind of serve, like you said, in the monotony and kind of the message of the film, which I would say just love, family, things like that, is served through mundane things like cleaning up dog shit and young kids being obnoxious, right? And
kids are the worst, man.
I couldn't help but just marvel at just the whole enterprise. And I also found myself really enraptured just by the both the visual stylings, but also just the tenderness of the story, which again is more about the granular aspect of what goes into love than any kind of like broad sweeping gesture. So in a sense, it's almost like the anti-Star Is Born, which is much more crowd pleasing and in your face and still awesome and very entertaining, but they're so different. I just think a movie like Roma is just really impressive and unlike anything else I saw this year. But what did you think in regards to, like you mentioned, it's a little slow and you felt you were maybe more distracted than I was, and what was holding you back from maybe investing more in the movie?
Yeah, it's interesting because I felt like the scenes where it really gripped me, I was totally in. This took me on a roller coaster ride of emotions. But I think when you get down to that monotony, it works to kind of establish the point that this is a small story about this servant maid for this family going through a very difficult time in her life and trying to understand the pain that she's going through while all these other things are happening around her. And I think that's probably what I appreciate most about this film is it really creates a world that is very realistic. And while she's, walking to the movie theater, there's so much liveliness and life going on in the world around them. And even like the shots in the movie theater where there's so many different things going on, whether it's like the nod to Gravity by Marooned, or it's like, seeing people making out or seeing people getting up and going to the bathroom. Like it feels very capturing, but those down times really just, it felt like it was very fast paced and really gripping, and then very just lost me when it slowed down. I do think as a piece of art, this is a great achievement. As a movie, it's obviously fantastic, and it's hard to really like these critiques are things that if I brought these to other movies, I would be basically saying every other movie is shit. Like, this is just a really well made movie. But I think in terms of like A Star Is Born or those other movies that I might consider like top tier, I think it comes down to preference. Like, what do you look for from movies? And it's kind of like, do you want the art house film, or do you want to see Scorsese, like, with like the musical drops and things like that? And if you can appreciate both and respect both, but I think I recently have been leaning more towards the latter in that.
Yeah, and I was reading some critiques on the film, and I know Richard Brody, pretty well known for the New Yorker, he was actually pretty critical in terms of how Roma treats Cleo, obviously the protagonist played by Yalitza Aparicio, her first role. And I thought she was very good in terms of playing a subdued,
subtle role,
angelic character that also happens to be going through a lot and, really having a tough time generally, right? But his critique was that because she's so soft-spoken and frankly does not speak a lot in this film, she's almost like not really served by the story. She's almost more of a cipher in terms of like the angelic working poor person, which is a bit of a trope. And it's interesting because this film was made, it's very autobiographical about Cuarón's experience. I mean, obviously it's taking place in 1970, 1971, Mexico City. We see the Corpus Christi massacre up close in the film. And Cuarón was 10 at the time when that came out. The two movies we see in the film, Marooned and then that French war movie, were both movies that were foundational to Cuarón growing up. And the whole relationship of being in, like a upper middle class living in the Roma neighborhood in Mexico City was Cuarón's experience. And he had a live-in housekeeper like Cleo, and that's what the movie was dedicated to. But it almost seemed like it was really just Cuarón's perspective, and I don't know, like maybe the perspective of the youngest kid in the movie, who was probably like the stand-in for Cuarón in real life, right? So like I understand that, and I guess that makes sense. And like we can even think about it when we see the paramilitaries, right? With Fermin and all of them, right? Then we see Zovek, that dude who does like the pose, right? Who's like, I was a real person who was like linked to like training the right wing fighters, but was never proven really. And then Cuarón just has them in there anyway as like fact, but it's fine. But just like there's no real comment on the politics. There's no real comment on her having a child out of wedlock, right? We don't know her stance on this really. We don't know the norms of abortion. Nothing's really said, right?
Right.
And I think that's just kind of anywhere we could have put Cleo in the story. We never really get her side or her take. We just kind of see what happens. And I think that's a deliberate choice. And it wasn't a problem for me, but I can understand that observation. I think it does make some sense. But it wasn't a problem for me.
Yeah, I think so. In an interview that he did, I forgot with who, Cuarón talked about how this is supposed to be shot kind of like a memory in a way, and how these are supposed to just be like you're looking back at these things in your mind and you're seeing them just at the way that they were, not necessarily accurate or inaccurate, just whatever that was. And I think that comes across really well, especially like her Cleo racing to the ocean near the end to try to save the two children that were being swept away to the sea. That scene, like walking to the movies, or the way that they shoot the massacre, like all those different scenes are done really well. And I think I appreciate him not making the comment on these different things and not putting a political spin on it, because I think he wanted to keep it really down to this experience and how, in a way it's a juxtaposition against the mom, who is also going through this incredibly difficult time in her life, and how Cleo handles it and how the mother handles it. And I think if you started to bring the political aspects in or making commentary on these different things, it makes a story about something it's not, which is it's about family. It's about what does it mean to be part of a family? Where do you find meaning within all these moments of pain and loss and fear? And I think Cuarón, I give him credit for not doing that, because it could have easily tried to say something that didn't need to be said to tell a story this beautifully. Um, you mentioned that Cuarón uh, was a cinematographer for this, which doesn't usually happen if you're writing, directing, producing. Um, what what scenes like stood out to you in terms of like shots? Because I think there was a lot in this movie that was really just like striking, cinematography wise.
Yeah, good question. I think definitely the shot at the training ground where Cleo's doing the pose
Hmm.
stood out to me. Like I said before, that shot of the camera panning parallel with Cleo walking down the sidewalk, I really liked. Um, let's see, there was the movie theater shot you mentioned before. I thought was really cool. That was an interesting angle. Um, the beach scene. Um, I mean, there's so many like close up scenes too, but like maybe like the car in the tunnel
Yeah.
at the end of the movie. I mean, and I think just in general, like the cinematography. I mean, it's shot on 65 millimeter film and looks like 70 millimeter when you actually see it.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, in general, the movie just looks better than other things because it was shot in a certain way. But did anything else stand out to you?
Yeah, this the whole time that they were on vacation for New Year's Eve, really, there was a lot. I thought of beauty there. Not only when they expanded it out into like the wildfire and all the stuff going on there, and like showing the landscape of where they are in beforehand, but then also when they bring it down to like the servants' party, like down below, and how like that felt like such like a little bodega like place, but then they bring it back to like the dancing of like the main family party. And
Yep.
I just thought that whole like sequence was really, really fantastic. It's a great film, and I think it rightfully is it going to be in the discussion for Best Picture. If this wins Best Picture, how do you see this affecting the landscape of how movies are? I don't know, like of just movies in general. If a Netflix product is now winning Best Picture.
Yeah. Well, that's the funny thing is the movie is on Netflix. In theory, the majority of people would see it on Netflix. However, because Netflix doesn't release its ratings, it's tough to gauge how many people have watched it since the 14th. We can look at the box office numbers and see, relative to how many theaters in, it's done pretty well in terms of just straight box office here in the States. And again, it was in some other theaters. I know like the theaters it was in Mexico were selling out all the time. So it's funny. It's almost like the awareness of the film has driven people to the theater. And then it's hard for us to know if people just know it's on Netflix, know anything about it. It's really unknown. Um, and I kind of struggled on like, I kind of wish this could have just got a 2,000 theater run in the States. On the other hand, the fact that this is going to reach, in theory, way more people than it ever would have because of being on Netflix right away, and getting an actual marketing push from Netflix because they're invested in the movie because they have distribution. Um, that's probably actually better. But in terms of it being a Netflix film and winning, it's funny because it's hard to like. I don't really like think of it as like a Netflix film. It's just a movie Netflix bought to put on their platform. It's like
Mhm.
Netflix didn't produce this; they just bought distribution rights. Cuarón had this produced,
Right.
and basically, and then Netflix helped market it after they got involved. Um, Now, it would say something about the Academy voters voting for something. I mean, there has been a stigma about Netflix. Remember, just last year, they were refusing to put movies in runs, and they were disqualifying themselves from like Cannes and other music film festivals, right?
Hmm.
So they've already evolved a little bit in that regard. But in terms of what it says, I don't know because you could almost see Netflix like reversing back if they get this win because it would just kind of like they could just pat themselves on the back and know that they can't really do any wrong. So
Hmm.
I can really see it going either way. It's tough to say.
Yeah, I really agree with you. It's tough to say, and it's interesting because I think the Irishman is supposed to be coming out next year.
Yep.
I think,
Yep.
and I could see that being another film that potentially could gain some awards buzz if Scorsese is able to uh, give us a film that's his typical Scorsese greatness. And that will continue to propel the conversation, and that will be a movie that is created and produced and funded by Netflix. So I think that will be the one that really will tell us like what direction this is gonna go in. If this is gonna be Netflix's new big thing is like they want to be in these awards discussions all the time, or if just having these, you know, these films that are made by the artists and they are just like, okay, put it on our platform. Here's a shitload of money just so that people are driving there. It'll be interesting, you know. Gonna be interesting. I also think, you know, I was listening to The Big Picture with Sean Fennessy and Amanda Dobbins. One thing that they brought up that I thought was really interesting, they talk about A Star Is Born and how, you know, it had a chance to potentially take the major categories at the Oscars. I think Best Director is definitely going to go to Cuarón.
Oh yeah. He's like a ridiculous betting favorite right now. And he should be. He's the again, we just talked about it. It was the best piece of directing, you know, and he's going up against a good year. It's going up against Bradley Cooper, debut role. Yorgos Lanthimos, who definitely has his own style, Barry Jenkins, Damien Chazelle. It's impressive competition. But and Mike Lee as well, who, you know, could get steam for lifetime achievement stuff. But yeah, I think Cuarón should win. It's funny because he won before. He won for Gravity, and when he wins, 5 of the last 6 best directors will have gone to Mexican men. And it's funny because when Cuarón won, he was the first Latino person, period, to win Best Director. And since he'll have won a second time, Inarritu won twice, and of course Del Toro won last year. The only one to get in on that, breaking that up, was Chazelle for La La Land. So yeah, I expect that to be Cuarón's. It's his to lose right now.
I don't know if I have much more to say about this. Do you?
No, I just
go watch it.
I really hope people watch it. And again, it's not like the most social movie. It's long. It's in Spanish subtitles. It's black and white. So it's like, it's not you can't do this for every hang. So you really have to commit to this movie. Yeah. But if you can't go to the theater, don't want to go to the theater, that's okay. Just turn the phone off and, like, you know, commit to it, because I really think it's more worth the viewing experience to commit to the movie that way.
I agree. Why don't we jump into some trends, some superlatives, who won and who lost 2018. You know, we're going to be touching on TV, movies, music, and just pop culture in general at this point. You know, maybe I think I'll just kick it off as one thing I just wanted to touch on. Maybe we'll go a little bit more into it next week, because I'm sure we'll each have at least one of these type of movies on our list. Documentaries. What a fucking year for documentaries, man. You know, Won't You Be My Neighbor, Minding the Gap, RBG, Free Solo, Andre the Giant, Momentum Generation, just to name a few of the really excellent documentaries that came out this year, and that garnered a lot of box office success this year. And so not only awards acclaim and just acclaim in general is things that people should be watching, but making some goddamn money. It's awesome to see. Did you have a favorite documentary this year? Not to spoil your list necessarily.
Still catching up on a bunch of them, so I won't say yet. But I will say there have been more this year that interest me than past years. I usually don't watch too many just for sake of prioritizing features. But the box office angle is very interesting to me, because overall box office did pretty well this year. But the fact that we saw multiple documentaries become some of the highest grossing documentaries ever is very impressive and frankly unexpected.
Definitely. I think it probably something to do with the topics, you know, like you're hitting Mr. Rogers at just, I think, the right time for a lot of nostalgia driven interest there. But also something like, you know, Andre the Giant or RBG, who has somehow found, like, Ruth Bader Ginsburg somehow has found herself into like SNL skits on a somewhat regular basis and has garnered just a lot of attention. The zeitgeist is pretty interesting. Any trends for you that you want to throw out there to start?
Yeah, let's stick to movies and money earning. Kind of unexpected. This is not a new trend of 2018, but once again, IP and sequels and just pre-established films dominated the box office yet again. And we saw studios reacting that way in kind. But I mean, you can go down like the top 14 grossing movies here in the States, and the only one that wasn't pre-established in some way was A Quiet Place at 12.
Mm.
Um, and then like if you want to go like expand, it's like A Star Is Born. I guess it's original, but it's the fourth remake of a
Yep.
story, right? Won't count that. Bohemian Rhapsody, based off real people, don't count
Mhm.
that. Crazy Rich Asians, based off a book. Mission Impossible, the sixth movie in the series. The Grinch, it's the Grinch, you know? And everything else is superheroes or Star Wars or Incredibles or Jurassic World. So yet again, IP dominated. I mean, shit. You can go look at every movie that made at least $100 million this year, and the only like other ones that were an IP were The Meg, which I'm pretty sure is an IP. I didn't double check that. The Meg, Quiet Place, and one other I forget. But it's like once again, people don't pay to see stuff that they're not familiar with.
Mhm.
So like whenever we see like the Twitter reactions, oh, why are they making this? We don't need this movie. No, well, people pay to see these movies. That's why they get made.
Right.
And like a movie we liked at the beginning of the year in February, Annihilation. Um, Paramount sold that movie's international distribution rights to Netflix right before the movie came out because they wanted to save money because they knew no one would go to see it. And sure enough, it made $36 million in the US, and again didn't get an international release because they knew no one would go to see it despite good
Mhm.
reviews, despite it being
Mm.
actually IP, but it's, despite it being from an auteur like Alex Garland and having a talented cast and
Yep.
looking amazing, didn't matter. And we've seen that trend yet again. I think there's exceptions to this. I think horror movies do well generally, just as a genre, but overall, it needs to be established to make big money. So, as we've talked about last year, movies that want to be original, want to be different, they can't cost that much. You can
Mhm.
make these movies, they just need to have smaller budgets. They need to require less of a return to justify their existence, which is kind of a shame. But that's why I always say try and support smaller films if you can, just to show your interest, because that's how you ensure they keep getting made. We like A24, for example. There's a bunch of other studios like that. But on the other side of the coin, like I said, A24 did partner with Apple this year, and Blumhouse, who makes a lot of horror, partnered with Amazon. So it's like they're not immune to these, issues.
Mhm.
But the box office did well this year. It's primarily, uh, you know, not the most original stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And even to expand upon that a little bit, you mentioned horror films being a genre that can be successful and not have to have that, original or not to have that established IP. But with horror films, it's almost like you kind of know what that experience is going to be like, whereas like a drama or even a comedy can be told in so many different ways. And, like you can come away with a lot of different feelings and experiences, and it's kind of an unknown in a sense. Horror films, you're going to go in, you're going to have jump scares, you're going to have things that really freak you out, mess with your head, and like you just know what that's going to feel like, what that's going to be like. So it's almost as if horror as a genre in and of itself is like a pre-packaged experience. So
Yeah.
people are predictable, man. So jumping back into trends or winners and losers, how about other movies? Anything from the movies that stood out to you in terms of winners or losers this year?
Yeah, just a bunch of actors I thought really like had strong breakouts this year. Some of them
Mhm.
had been stuff that we didn't know, but really kind of came on strong or had like a moment that I think will be a turning point in their careers. Carey Mulligan in Wildlife is obvious.
Yeah.
Um, Stefan James, both in Homecoming and then Beale Street, I think is another obvious one. Billy Magoosin in Maniac and Game Night. I think he's going to be in a lot of stuff moving forward.
Hmm.
Uh, Jodie Comer, just killing Eve. It's TV, but
Yep.
definitely for her. And then probably my favorite breakout of the year is Vanessa Kirby from Mission Impossible Fallout. Yes, she was in The Crown, so it's not that she was an unknown, but
Hmm.
I think she solidified herself as quite the star in Fallout. So and there's other, like people that have been around the block, like John Cho, for example, really killing it
Hmm.
in Searching, one of his first lead roles, stuff like that. Um, Anyone else come to mind for you?
Well, in terms of breakout, I mean, John Krasinski as a director,
Yeah.
I think is a breakout for me. Also, apparently, he's pretty good in Jack Ryan because he received a SAG nomination for that role, which I thought was surprising, but good for him. He doesn't have to be Jim Halpert the rest of his life. Um, Noah Centineo was somebody I had down as a
Oh, geez.
breakout from.
Yep.
To all the boys I loved before. I mean, you want to talk about a glow up? This dude went from having like 30,000 followers on Instagrams now being like 3 million or something crazy like
Yeah,
that.
that actually speaks to just Netflix's ability to mint stars. We saw this, of course, with Stranger Things back 2 years ago, but Lana Condor, his co-star in To All the Buzz I Love Before, then Zoe Deitch and Glenn Powell from Set It Up, same thing. They're all winners just because Netflix, that's one of Netflix's demos that they just dominate. They've taken over rom-coms and they blow up people's socials. They're stars when the movies hit.
Yeah.
So yeah, shout out to all of them.
Yeah, and one that I had as a breakout, but we can save it for. Well, I'll say it now, but we can talk more about it in TV if you want. Just Jodie Comer from Killing Eve. I think if there's someone that I like didn't know anything about and just totally like took my brain by storm, it would be her.
Mhm.
And then just a couple people I wanted to shout out for like leveling up this year. I felt like they were already pretty well established. Rami Malek, I thought was a big level up. He went from being, Mr. Robot, being in some smaller parts to being fucking Freddie Mercury and killing it. Like phenomenal. I expect him to get a Oscar Best Actor nom. And just Brian Tyree Henry, already great on Atlanta, but everybody's talking about his like 12-minute scene and if Beale Street Could Talk, and also voicing I forgot which Spider-Man, who is in Spider-Man the Spider-Verse.
He's Miles' dad.
Gotcha. And then also
Widows too.
Yeah, Widows. So hell of a year for him. Any other people you thought leveled up this year?
I wouldn't say leveled up because he was already top tier, but Joaquin Phoenix had 3 different roles. He was in Sisters Brothers. He was in Don't Worry, He Won't Get Far on Foot, and he was in You Were Never Really Here, and he was also cast in The Joker. So Joaquin killed it.
Yeah, that's a really, really strong year for him. I can't believe I forgot him. Great call on that. Just a couple of other superlatives I wanted to throw out there for movies. Best fist cock goes to Henry Cavill. I mean, just that scene in general, and also one of my favorite gifts from the year is just him loading up his fist
cock.
Yeah. And then Dave, for best jumping out of a plane scene, who do you think I picked?
Tough call. It's probably Cavill too, right?
Nah, Deadpool, dog. I mean, that would have been one of my like favorite like 10-minute scenes, and just so unexpected, jumping into the wind. Terry Crews, pretty much everybody except for Domino dies. Peter W dies in a very tragic way.
Brad Pitt.
And yeah, best cameo of the year, Brad Pitt for 2 seconds as the Vanisher. Fucking phenomenal. So, the helo jump in Mission Impossible is great, but that is just like one of my favorite moments of the year in film. Mm-hmm. Anything else for films for you?
I think that's it. Yeah, film was interesting. I guess I had initially pegged Claire Foy to be listed on here just because, yes, she was, written out of The Crown, aged out, right? But she was in First Man, which she's probably going to get Oscar nom for. But she's also in The Girl in the Spider's Web, which didn't do very well. And then First Man also underperformed. So I had pegged her as like a big winner, but it's probably not as it's probably disappointing for her, all things considered.
Yeah. Were there any other disappointments for you? One for me was Damien Chazelle. Because if a year ago when I heard about First Man, I was like, Chazelle going into space with Gosling, like, sign me up. This is going to be amazing. And it definitely fell short for me. I still think it's a well done movie, but if you go back to our review, I was pretty disappointed by it.
Yeah. A movie we didn't actually review, but I thought was pretty disappointing was Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. The first Jurassic World obviously was very derivative, but it was kind of like the Force Awakens treatment, let's just kind of refresh Jurassic Park, the first one, and just get people back. I thought that movie was very fun and entertaining and lively. And Fallen Kingdom, they took a chance. They were more subdued, almost like horror themes.
Hmm.
Didn't think it worked enough. I just didn't think it was ultimately as like entertaining as it need to be, which is disappointing. But it made a ton of money, so I don't think Universal really cares. Let's see. I also was disappointed that Robin Hood was straight garbage. Just because I don't know. I like Taron Egerton. I like Ben Mendelsohn. I
Hmm.
thought it could have been decent, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the movie I'm not going to see. And, you got Jamie Foxx and all these other people that you really like. And Robin Hood just, for me, doesn't hit. Like, I just want to watch the cartoon one all the time.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the takeaway for most people is we just last year King Arthur also didn't do well. So I think like edgy takes on like well-established old myths, ancient medieval time stuff. I think
Mhm.
we're good on those edgy takes. You either have to
Right.
do it like realistic based like Game of Thrones or campy and, more charismatic. Or just don't do
Mhm.
them at all because they're not quite as prescient as myths these days. So I think we've kind of learned that lesson. Also, Ocean's 8. I didn't think it was
Yeah.
bad. I liked it, but I just wanted to be a lot better than it was, you know?
Yeah. Definitely. I wanted to ask you, what was your most confusing choice of the year in film? I have one. I'll start off. I'll give you a second to think. So I'm kind of springing this on you. J.K. Rowling gets my most confusing choice for basically just trying to upend her whole canon, and really just upsetting all of her fans. I still can't get over McGonagall being in this fucking movie, which just makes zero sense if you go by the Harry Potter timeline. One other movie trend I want to shout out before we move on to TV and music is rom coms.
Yep.
Crazy Rich Asians, big success in the box office this year. To All the Boys I Love Before, I already mentioned. Just it's nice to have rom coms coming back. Something a little lighter for people to digest.
Yeah,
Why don't we move
Crazy Rich
on to?
Asians.
Oh, go ahead.
Crazy Rich Asians, I think it was the highest grossing rom-com at the box office since 2009, since The Proposal. Been a long time. So yeah, like I
Pretty
agree with
fucking
you.
good.
It's nice to be back.
And speaking of Crazy Rich Asians, something else that kind of moving into music, I think was a trend in music was just the rise of Asian artists in this year.
Yep.
88 Rising had a nice album that we reviewed. Check that out. Obviously, but BTS
Oh
is
yeah.
fucking huge. Blackpink,
Yep.
another group that's really breaking out.
Chris Wu, Jay Park,
Mhm.
a lot of them. Yeah.
Rich Brian. A lot of people had a lot of Asian artists had good years, and it's really encouraging to see. What are some other music trends that stood out for you?
Yeah, I guess on that vein, Latin artists also had a big year
Hmm.
here in terms of permeating everywhere else. I mean, coming off of Despacito last year with Luis Fonsi and Daddy Yankee, now we have Bad Bunny, who's a huge star despite not having a single album or mixtape to his name. J Balvin, who's been in the game a while, but really moving now. Ozuna, same way. Um, NOLA gets out of jail and just picks up right where he left off. And then artists like Drake and Cardi B really leaning into that sound. Really speaks to how prevalent and popular and well it's doing. Um, Similar speaking on the Drake front, I mean Drake obviously had a massive year despite having a album that no one really speaks of super critically highly. It's good, but it's not like amazing or anything. But Drake still
Hmm.
has like the most top 10 hits this side of the Beatles now. Like,
Yep.
and also shout out Drake giving Karina Evans a shot. She directed all three of his videos for his big hits, and I think she killed all those. God's Plan Nice
Hmm.
for What in my feelings. So shout out Karina Evans, and of course Drake had a good year. Shocker, right?
Yeah, yeah, for real. Um, I guess also maybe a weird thing to shout out would just be like early 2000s TV or in movie nostalgia in music videos. A
There
very
you go.
specialized category, but thank you next using Legally Blonde, Mean Girls, and one other movie I'm forgetting.
Uh, 13 going on 30.
Yes, thank you. And Drake using Degrassi for one of his videos. So
For
shout out that.
I'm upset. Yeah.
Yep. So shout
Also,
out those.
yeah,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
The Charlie XCX and Troye Sivan made the song literally called 1999,
Right.
and the whole time they do all those different things. From the late 90s and early 2000s. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I think nostalgia for that time is just very it's like a safe play, you know. That's
Hmm.
why we see it, but it works.
Definitely works. Um, Another music trend I thought was good and bad in a lot of ways was songs and albums becoming shorter. It's kind of we kind of highlighted this with Valet and his mixtape "Good Job" earlier in the year,
Mhm.
and then it really kind of went all the way to the extreme with Tierra Whack with Whack World,
Yeah.
song that made it onto our best of 2018 album. So check that out. What do you make of this trend, or do you like it?
Yeah, and of course we saw with all the Kanye produced records
Yes,
in May and
Good
June too.
Fridays.
Um, it's a cool trend, but I'm reluctant to call it a trend just yet because on the flip side you have Migos, Drake, Ray Shremmerd, just recently Zayn. We're getting like almost 90-minute albums from, and what's the common theme here? These are artists that are very popular, very famous, and they simply just make very long records to get more streams.
Mhm.
Of course, this is no fast rule. Of course, we're still getting really big artists making 40-minute albums, or like 50 minutes, a normal length, right? So I'm reluctant to call it a trend yet, just because I'm not sure if this just was like by chance or if it's like really a sign of things to come. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm. Sure. Um, the last music, I guess, trend I wanted to just point out, I talk about this on our best albums list as well, but just female rock artists this year had a really great year. Just to run down the list quick: Courtney Barnett, Lucy Dacus, Phoebe Bridgers, Boy Genius, Waxahachie, Soccer Mommy, Camp Cope, The Beths, all dropped really great albums.
Snail mail.
Um, Snail Mail. I knew I was going to forget one. So thank you for catching that for me. So just really, that's the most exciting thing in rock music, a
Yeah.
dying genre, while hip hop continues just to dominate and be very exciting. Anything else you want to shout out in music?
Um, let's see. Shout out the word drip. Drip had a good year this year. There's a genius video about who invented the word drip, but so watch that. But
That's really funny.
took over. Also, shout out Ski Master Slump God, Stokely, best album cover of the year.
Yes, great album cover. Um, the only superlative I had for music was most overrated, the 1975. Um, MTV. Why don't we wrap up with TV? Any trends or superlatives you want to shout out with TV? I already mentioned Jodie Comer as a
Yeah,
breakout for me.
we mentioned Netflix a little bit already, but I think overall the streaming wars continue to take shape. Uh, Netflix continues to dominate. Netflix has the most subscribers in the U.S. and is also very successful international. That's where they're growing the most. Um, they're taking over stand-up comedy. They've taken over stand-up comedy. They've taken over cooking shows. Um, they're experimenting with reality. They're doing everything. They're just getting footholds everywhere they can. Rom-coms. We talked about that already. Meanwhile, Amazon, for example, we know they shell out all that money just to have the ability to adapt Lord of the Rings, right? $500 million just to be able to start making the show that will cost hundreds of millions of dollars. But then Amazon shows, did they quite have the footprint you would think? I mean, Homecoming,
No.
me and you like it, critically liked, but we can't really speak to how popular that was. And then a show like Jack Ryan, I think we each mentioned that already, but I think
Mhm.
it was decently well liked, but we can't really speak to how popular it was. Sneaky Pete, same way. And then
Mhm.
Romanovs was a high profile flop. So I think Amazon continues to be in an interesting space. I mentioned they have their new Blumhouse relationships. We'll see how that goes. And then Hulu is in a huge holding pattern right now because the Fox Disney merger, if and when that goes through, Disney will now have controlling interest in that. So Hulu, I mean, can you name a Hulu original that came out this year besides The Handmaid's Tale? Nothing comes to mind for me. I know there's
Nope.
one or two. Killing Eve's on there, but it wasn't a Hulu show, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
BBC.
and then Apple continues to announce shows they're making, but they've yet to describe their platform or have any of these shows go into development. So Apple still feels a little further away. I know Variety predicted that they might perhaps try and purchase a major studio such as Sony, which would be very interesting. And then we finally got Disney Plus unveiled to a certain extent and got some shows for that. So I think just the streaming wars continue to take shape. And you have the smaller ones are like CBS and AMC Premiere. And I think there's just going to be like haves and have-nots with this. And we there's still a lot of unknowns, but I think the one certainty is that Netflix will always be a have. They spend the most money,
Yes.
make the most stuff, and the most people watch them. So I think we talked about Roma a lot already. It's tough to really talk about TV at all without talking about how Netflix affects it and will continue to drive everything everyone else does.
Yeah, Netflix, what a disruptor to this whole system. You go back, even like 10 years ago, and it was the DVD service, and now it's mainly the streaming service. Maybe 10 years actually seems about right. It was the DVD service still. Right. It's also interesting. You kind of mentioned it, but the IP wars on top of these streaming wars is really interesting. Jon Favreau's The Mandalorian. We've been seeing some pictures and some sneak peeks. But like you mentioned,
incredible. Let's go.
It's a great cast. Shout out Gus Fring, dog. Like, give me all the Gus Fring. But it's going to be interesting to see which of these IPs really flesh out and work. I think we already know Game of Thrones is probably going to be successful. I mean, they would have to really, I think, fudge it up in order for it to not still drive people to HBO. And HBO is not really in this conversation as like a streaming service. It's going to be super affected by these things.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting too because we know that HBO is under Warner Media now, right? And we know that there was like those headlines about that HBO having content changes and they walked it back. But then we saw that Warner Media wants to make a bigger fleshed out service. I mean, obviously there's a lot of content there. It makes some sense, and HBO will be kind of part of that. So a lot of questions. The key thing that happened this year was that they chose to sell Friends to Netflix for another year, rather than put it on HBO, something they own, or put it on their new thing that's clearly not ready yet. So while we know that everyone else wants to get in the streaming wars, not everyone is ready to truly compete. And simply, Netflix just had to write a big enough check for Warner to be like, yeah, we'll give you our most popular thing. And now their talk is that when they're ready, Friends might stay on Netflix and not be exclusive to the Warner thing. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and it'll be interesting to see how HBO relates to the changes going on at Warner overall.
Definitely. Any superlatives for TV for you?
Great comeback this year. Brendan Fraser in Trust. I know one of the best TV episodes of the year was on Trust, but Brendan Fraser not been in our lives that and he came back in a nice way, so that's nice to see. You mentioned Jodie Comer. TV is funny because overall trend is that movie stars continue to be going to TV. Small Commitment, right? Julia Roberts, Jonah Hill, Emma Stone, famously this year. Amy Adams.
Who do you think did it the best out of like the group that really went this year from the big screen to the small screen? I think probably Julia Roberts for me.
I like all four of them. It's a tough question. They all did good. They all had very different roles. I'd say Amy Adams or Julia. I think Julia Roberts was playing off type, and Emma Stone was a little bit too. So I think that gets some extra points for me. But we're gonna keep seeing this, and I mean, Roma again. There's some big stars on that too. Not that we really cared, but then Krasinski going back to TV after flexing his muscles on The Quiet Place and the Benghazi movie. So TV is always going to be right now is going to be where people continue to go, and especially if Netflix continues to make new people famous overnight, people that are already famous really can easily see the benefit of joining a streaming service for the small commitment. It's pretty easy to connect all the dots.
Yeah, I I totally agree. And I also, this is my breakout director for TV for the year, and someone I hope gets either a contract with, HBO or Netflix, like someone just lets him create. Park Chan Wook from Little Drummer Girl. I think for being an unknown to most people, he really broke out with his style in that show. We talk about it at length in our best TV shows of the year, so go back and check that out. And also our review of Drummer Girl, we give him a lot of praise. But he's my breakout, and I'd like to see him get a bigger property to work with moving forward. Anything else for TV, Dave?
It's funny, when I first started compiling this list, a few months ago, I had Pete Davidson knocked down as a winner of the year. And in a sense, I would still say he is a winner because he got much more famous and more exposure and brand recognition, all that. On the other hand, it seems like he's having a tough time right now. So it's tough to be too positive about that. But I was leading, I feel like career-wise, he did pretty nice this year, despite just being his normal SNL self and doing some Sundance movies,
Yeah, Pete Davidson's struggles are very public, and I appreciate that, and I also really feel for him for that. He's obviously going through a lot with this breakup with Ariana. He's got a terrible song named after him now that he will follow him around forever. So, yeah, no, I hope he gets the help he needs, but I would agree. I think he's also a winner. SNL does not utilize him correctly, which is too bad. They can't really figure out a way to use him. So, any other TV trends before we wrap up?
I think that nails it pretty well.
Those are our winners and losers for this year, then. Pretty good, Dave. Pretty good.
Pretty good.
Pretty good year for all the pop culture. And if you want to keep sticking with us into 2019, hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Go to @NowstalgiaPod on Twitter, and give us a follow there and interact with us. We always like hearing from you. And give us 5 stars on iTunes. We appreciate you. And next week, be looking for our best movies. And I don't think we're going to be talking anything else. Maybe 21 Savage? 21?
Perhaps. Maybe we'll say that for the week after. Aquaman, Mary Poppins, Bumblebee, a lot of other movies that are coming out. So we'll talk about some other stuff, 21, probably the week after movies. I think movies will be a long enough discussion on its own.
Definitely. So tune into that podcast, and we'll see you next week. Happy holidays.